Well, good afternoon. Dean Heyman, I got to get this microphone right. Dean Heyman, Professor Fielding, faculty, parents, families, children, but most of all, we're going to keep doing this. The 2018 graduates of the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. Let's give them another round. Yeah. You're probably going to hear that a lot today. So I am very honored to share this day with you. Coming in here, hearing the music, hearing the excitement just made me so excited. It's infectious. This is such a beautiful setting with so many great events that have happened in here, and this has to be one of the better ones. But graduations this year, 2018, for me, are especially poignant because it was 40 years ago, 40, almost to the day, that I sat in your chair, having just completed my law training. So I'm really reflective on what did that feel like 40 years ago? What's happened since then? I have two daughters, they're 26 and 22, and they said, so Mom, what's your advice after all that time? What do you have to say to the graduates? And when you actually start to think about it, you really wonder, that's a pretty daunting question. I start by remembering how I felt when I sat in your chair. It was 1978. I was graduating from Yale Law School. The ceremony was outside in the courtyard. And I was really excited, but I frankly was really scared. I was really proud, but I also was very uncertain. I knew what my next job was, which was to come here to Los Angeles and clerk for a federal judge for 1 year, but I didn't know what would happen after that. Some of you may be in the same position. You know your one next step, but you don't know what's going to happen after that. Frankly, if someone had come up to me that day in my cap and gown and tapped me on the shoulder and said that 40 years from now, you'll be president of one of the country's largest foundations, and you'll have a chance to address the UCLA 2018 graduates of the School of Public Health, I would have fallen off my chair. I never dreamed about that. I never imagined that I would have had these kinds of opportunities. So my main message today is that you really don't know. One can't predict what your circumstances will be, what the context of the world will offer, or the opportunities of your lifetime. But what you can do is shape how you will show up in the world, how you will show up. You know, there's that popular phrase, 80% of success is showing up, but I disagree. I think 100% of success is how you show up. I have learned over the 40 years that if we pay attention to that, to how we show up in the world, we will have joy, we will be productive, we will have impact. So I thought today I would just share a few stories about some of the attributes that I think have been important about how to show up and what I've admired in others that I've seen. Dean Heyman had 5 or 6 words, and I have 5 attributes, so you have a lot to remember, but there's a lot of similarity. First, show up with gratitude. That's an easy thing to say at a graduation, surrounded by your parents and family. I remember back to the day in 1978, my dad, sitting right there, was there with me 40 years ago, sitting in that courtyard. And my mom, too. She unfortunately died at a fairly early age of 74. But my dad and mom carried with them a note from my grandpa. My grandpa was a farmer in rural Minnesota, and me going to law school on the East Coast was really far away from anything he had imagined or experienced. He and my grandma had, with my dad, driven me back across the country 3 years earlier to start my graduate work at Yale. My grandma went to the nearest store and bought me a mop and made sure that my dorm room floor was clean. So I bet that sounds familiar to some of you who have had similar support from your relatives. But it was clearly a different world for them. 3 years later, on graduation day, they couldn't make the trip back east anymore, so my grandpa wrote me a note instead, which I have saved. He said, "Carol, you sure have made a wonderful life for yourself. All the places you have been and all the great people you have met." Well, even then, 40 years ago in my 20s, I knew that that wasn't quite right. A wonderful world that I've made for myself, just as you know today, you have not made this for yourself. I had not made that for myself. My parents, friends, brothers, grandparents, teachers, mentors, all had played a part. When I spoke with Dean Heyman about doing this, she told me that 20% of you, 1 in 5, are the first in your family to have graduated from college. That is wonderful. That is incredible. And I'm sure all the graduates, but especially those of you, know what I'm talking about. Your parents and your grandparents and those involved in your life didn't have the same opportunities that you've had. Guess what? The debt of gratitude keeps growing. My dad and brother who are here stood with me for the next 40 years and continued. My debt of gratitude to them continues to grow. And your debt of gratitude to all of those who brought you here today and all of those sitting on the stage will also continue to grow. But remembering gratitude and remembering your interdependence on others also helps you in your career. It helps me learn to be a CEO. 14 years ago, when the Packard Foundation Board gave me that honor, and I first got that title, I thought, hey, I can do this. I'd just gone through all these rounds of interviewing. I know how to do this, and after all, I'm called Chief Executive Officer. But it didn't take me long to realize that it wasn't going to be about me, and there wasn't anything I could do, no matter how much of a title I had, if I didn't have a team of people that I was dependent on, and that we worked together. Over these 40 years of my law career, I've had a chance to see so many effective people accomplishing huge social change. But it's been those people who recognize their teamwork that have made the most difference. It's not been the accomplishments of these years. It hasn't been about single heroic acts, but rather about consistent, tenacious teamwork. So my first message to you is, it matters how you show up, and show up with gratitude. A good leader never forgets those who shaped them. And a good leader never forgets those who open doors for you and commits to opening doors for others. Second, show up with courage. Speak your truth. Now, some of us are introverts, some of us are extroverts, but no matter what your personality, you're going to have times and moments in your life, both small and big, where you'll need to speak up and you'll need to speak your truth. That same farmer grandpa who wrote me the note back in 1978 taught me a lesson about this too. The year before, after my second year of law school, I worked for a law firm in Minneapolis. And at the end of the summer, the tradition is if they like you, they'll take you out to lunch and make you an offer to come back and work for them 3 years later. Now remember, this was 40 years ago, but still, it was just 1978. So on that last day, the law firm decided to take me lunch, and they were going to make me an offer to come back. We walked to a nice building in downtown Minneapolis. We looked into the dining room. It was beautiful. Green leather, shining brass, dark wood. But we didn't sit there. Instead, we went up a side stairway into the second floor, and it was a bright, sunny room with tables with white tablecloths and roses in the center. So it was a great lunch, and they made me the offer, and I was delighted to have it. But when I went back to the law firm, one of the young lawyers said, "Wow, I can't believe that, Carol. They took you to a club that discriminates against women. In the dining room that you ate in, that bright sunny one, that was the dining room for women. That was just 40 years ago, but I know that that kind of discrimination has happened along race and other lines much in a continuous way and frequently. Well, I wasn't going to say anything. I just went back, packed up. I was going to go back to law school for my third year, put my head down, get the degree. But that weekend after leaving the firm and before heading back to school, I made the 100-mile drive through the countryside of Minnesota to visit my parents and my grandparents. And surprisingly, my grandpa said to me when he heard that story, he said, "That's not good enough. You go back and you tell that law firm that that was not right." So that was a small moment in some ways in life, but that small moment was really an important message for me coming from him. Show up with courage. Well, after law school, I did come here to LA. I did clerk for a judge. I did not go back to that law firm in Minneapolis. Instead, I took a job here in LA working for a nonprofit organization that served developmentally disabled people. And there, every day, I really saw people who showed up with courage. The Right to Education for the Handicapped Act had just been passed by Congress, and parents had a whole slew of new legal rights to advocate for their developmentally disabled child to get the services they need in school. So Congress passed the law, but it was the parents who provided the courage. Every day, every year, year after year, those parents needed to show up with courage and tell the schools, "Hey, what you're doing for my child is not good enough. You must do more." So I bet you graduates already speak your truth about race, about gender, about inequities, about rights. And it's important that you continue to do that throughout your career and life. Third, show up with respect. After that work at that nonprofit, I went to work for a law firm here in LA and stayed practicing civil commercial litigation for 7 years, became a partner. But I realized that far into it that I was enjoying my evenings and weekends serving on boards of nonprofits much more than I was enjoying my day job. So I rolled the dice, I started looking around, decided to go back to the nonprofit sector, took a big salary cut, and got this job as a program officer with the Packard Foundation in Northern California. So all of a sudden, I had the privilege of less salary, but the privilege of directing real dollars to nonprofit organizations working really hard to improve the world. So as someone who has resources that you're directing, as a grant maker, you soon realize that you are one step removed, that there's a true power imbalance, that there's a gap between you who represents resources and those who seek those resources. And if you don't watch out, you can be out of touch and make distorted decisions. At Packard, we try to really emphasize with our employees that effective work begins first with respect, and that respect begins with listening, true deep listening to the nonprofits that work with us and also the communities in which they work. If I'm honest, foundations, and including our own, still need to improve in this area. But at Packard, I know our practices did get better when we started to regularly survey our grantees, and also that when we started to shape our approaches and strategies with them and the communities they served. So how you show up matters. Show up with respect, beginning with listening. But I'm talking about philanthropy, and I think that message is relevant to all of you. Many of you in your first careers, in your first next steps, will be working at systems levels and analyzing data and poring over new policies in government. You can get pretty far removed from the people with whom you're trying to serve and be helpful. So beware of that. Beware of that gap, and don't stop listening to those you are seeking to help. and listen with the willingness to actually change what you're doing as a result of what you're hearing. Fourth, show up with heart. Another life lesson for me over these years wasn't just to get beyond the papers and the podiums and the desks and listen, but also to get beyond those and really try to feel with your heart. Melinda Gates, at another graduation 4 years ago, happened to be one of my daughter's graduations, urged the graduates, let your heart break. Throughout your career, let your heart break. It's too easy over 40 years, decades of career, to become so busy and so knowledgeable, so adept at analysis and articulation that you stop feeling. Guard against that. Open your heart to those feelings, needs, life experiences of those you seek to help. I was reminded of this once again recently on a trip to Mississippi and Louisiana, where our foundation over the last 5 years has been providing financial support to advocates and public health professionals and service providers to try to increase access to quality reproductive health care for women in those states. On paper, those numbers clearly show barriers to women, especially women of color, barriers to quality and affordable care. But it's an entirely different experience to read those surveys at your desk than to go there and visit and listen and feel. On a recent trip to those states, I visited crowded waiting rooms where young women had traveled long distances, often had to take time off from work, often had to borrow money to pay for the services they were seeking, and now still faced a long wait. Even worse was the need for some of them to walk through picket lines and people yelling at them because they were seeking family planning or, in some cases, abortion services at the one remaining clinic in Mississippi. These were barriers to health care that I never had to face, that my daughters have never had to face. And it's important for me and all of us to feel that different reality and to let our hearts break. Again, there are likely parallels with you entering public health careers. Some of you will go work on the ground and in community right away, and I bet you your heart will break, often. Others of you will go into government or into academia or in large agencies, but whatever you do, be sure to create that time in your life and work for you to stop, listen, feel, experience, let your heart break. Finally, and this is a great thing, Dean Heyman mentioned it too, and we are at UCLA, finally, show up with optimism. Clear-eyed, pragmatic, yes, but optimism. The kind of optimism that is willing to acknowledge and celebrate the progress of the past, but pushes you to work even harder for the future. I love the statement on the UCLA website, for Optimist website, says, at UCLA, optimism is a doubt-defying state of mind. It's California dreaming blended with daring, impactful doing. As I look back on my 40 years since I graduated, in every area, I too feel what the dean was saying, patient impatience, or I was going to say restless optimism. There is progress to acknowledge, but there is also so much work to do. Just take climate change, stemming greenhouse gas emissions. That's a really big public health issue that I know many of you are working on. So I went back to the records for Los Angeles to 1978. And do you realize that during those years, so 40 years ago, there were nearly 150 days when the air registered at what they called stage 1, when it was so unhealthy that all children, not just some, were supposed to discontinue all vigorous activity, no matter what the duration. That's a lot of days, more than 1 in 3. I know you have still air advisory warnings now, but it's very infrequent, if ever, that it reaches that level of unhealthy air in Los Angeles. Huge progress. Looking globally, back in 1978, climate change was hardly discussed or little understood. And today, 196 countries, although I haven't read the news today, maybe it's 195, have signed the Paris Agreement with the goal of keeping greenhouse gases down so that the global average temperature will be well below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. But of course we need to do much more. We need to go farther, and we need to go faster. But look what's happening this year. Despite abandonment at a federal level, there is real progress. This year, in September, there will be the California Climate Summit. And thousands of people from around this country, from communities, cities, and states, and really from around the world, will gather in San Francisco to say, we're not going back, to recommit themselves to making progress towards stemming climate change, and to do it further and faster. Many of those who gather will have public health backgrounds and will be working in communities or all the way up at global levels to stem climate change. Now that summit, if it leads to real action and commitment, is a great example of California dreaming blended with daring, impactful change. So my advice is life is not simply about showing up, it's about how you show up. And if you show up with gratitude, courage, respect, heart, and optimism, you will be joyful. What will that world look like that you're entering with your newly minted public health degree? You are entering the field of public health at a perfect time. The progress of the past, the new tools of analysis of the present, give us the opportunity to really accelerate the progress in public health. You're also entering a time when the world needs you, our country needs you, Los Angeles needs you more than ever. We need your systems thinking and command of data if we are to contain Zika and Ebola, address climate change, or address the domestic crises of mental health or opioid addiction or gun violence. We need your commitment to equity, a commitment to not just privileged health for the rich, but to quality public health for all. We need your focus on the power of science. We will not succeed if we are not rigorous in protecting evidence and scientific integrity. And we need your cross-boundary thinking. Climate change, for example, is connected to health, to gender equity, to income inequality. And if we're going to make any lasting, sustainable progress, we need people like you who have been trained in cross-boundary thinking and are committed to find solutions that last. So you are entering the right profession at the right time and in a world that needs you more than ever. So finally, I bet you can't even imagine what you'll be like 40 years from now. I bet you that seems awfully old, as it did back to me in 1978. The good news is that when you actually get there, it doesn't feel that old. But what will your 40 years bring? Where will you be on your 40th reunion? I hope you'll be here, getting together with your classmates 4 decades into your career, and that you'll be grateful as you are today to the school that brought you here. I don't know, though, what your trajectory will be in life or your career. You don't know, and I'm sure there will be twists and turns along the way. But I do know you will show up. And if you pay attention to how you show up, I do know that you will live a joyful, productive, and impactful life. So let me end with the words of my grandpa, who wrote me that note in 1978. You sure have made a wonderful life for yourself. All the places you have been, and all the great people you have met. So go forth with gratitude, courage, respect, heart, and optimism. Have a wonderful journey. Thank you.